I stepped off the shuttle onto the manicured grounds of Willow Creek Manor, clutching my oversized tote bag like a lifeline. The late afternoon sun poured through the oaks, gilding the rows of white folding chairs set before the old stone gazebo, where my cousin Anita and her college sweetheart, Marcus, would soon say their vows. As I threaded through the clusters of guests, I could feel my family's eyes on me, an invisible chorus of half smiles and raised eyebrows that pricked at my confidence. "Look at her outfit," my Aunt Marge whispered to my Uncle Pete as I passed by. "Really, Anne? You couldn't borrow a dress from your sister?" Aunt Marge's voice was brittle, her words sharp enough to cut through the hum of cicadas. I kept walking, head high. I'd learned long ago that direct confrontation with Aunt Marge only invited more jabs. Beside me, my younger brother, Felix, elbowed me under the pretense of pointing out the chocolate fountain. "You okay?" he hissed. "Fine," I said, even though my cheeks flared. "Just thirsty." I took a sip of water from a pink plastic cup, then tucked my index finger under my dress's neckline to lift it away from my collarbone. The linen fabric still felt sticky from the drive. Family gatherings had always been minefields. When I was 10, they teased me about my pigtails. At 16, about my braces. At 26, about my 2-year stretch without a proper job. Today, it was my dress, too casual, they'd said. And the fact that I'd spent the last 2 years freelancing as a copy editor, never mentioning my modest apartment or the way I budgeted by clipping coupons. I'd once dreamed of journalism school, until my mother's heart attack had forced me home with a car payment and a stack of medical bills to cover. I loved my life, I told myself, but every whisper at weddings had me shrinking. I spotted my best friend, Dana, a few rows back, adjusting her camera strap. She'd volunteered to document the wedding highlights, capturing rings, tears, and cake. She caught my eye and mouthed, "You look gorgeous." Her presence was a soft anchor in the storm of family scrutiny. I made my way to the end of my row, sandwiched between cousin Eddie, who'd brought his new boyfriend Owen, a shock in itself, given how rigid Eddie's parents had been, and my mother, who stuck out like a vintage bird against the blank white chairs. She offered me a watery smile that didn't meet her eyes. I grabbed her hand. "Mom, are you excited?" She inhaled, her lipstick perfect despite the heat. "Very. It's nice to see everyone." Her gaze flicked to Aunt Marge and Uncle Pete, who were still muttering about my fashion sense. She squeezed my hand. "Don't mind them." I nodded, but when Aunt Marge's cousin's third removal of the peekaboo chiffon stole fell off her shoulders, she clucked, "Even the bride will be overdressed. Look at you. Off to a barbecue, dear?" Then she smirked as if she'd landed a punch. I forced a small laugh. The romantic test of my patience had begun. A 90-minute ceremony, walking a tightrope of insults. I took a breath, turned to Eddie. "How's Owen?" Eddie glanced over, mouth twisting. "He's great. He loves the cake." He nodded behind him, and I glimpsed Owen, resplendent in seafoam green, shooting me an awkward wave. I smiled back. Owen was a sweet guy, one of the few people here who didn't see me as the family punchline. After the bridesmaids processed in gowns of dusky rose, the air shifted as dear Anita took the aisle, led by her father. The early rancor faded into tears, both my mother's and mine, as Anita glided like a dream. I realized how I'd been bracing for family ugliness when I should have been present for my cousin's joy. My heart lifted, and I breathed easier. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the crowd erupted in applause. I found myself grinning, forgetting Aunt Marge's barbs, glad that at least one family story had a happy ending. Anita kissed Marcus. He spun her around, laughter bouncing like bells on wind. It felt like magic. During cocktail hour, we milled around high boys draped in linen. I raised my glass to my mother. "Beautiful, right?" She brushed a loose curl behind her ear. "Absolutely." She paused, scanning the guests. "Look, Dad and Claudia aren't here yet. Do you think they'll show up?" I blinked. "Claudia? Who's that?" Mom's face tightened. "Your father's new wife. He married her 6 months ago." She hesitated. "I thought he'd bring her to one family event." I pinched my lips. "A new wife, of course. He didn't mention it." Her lips trembled. "He wanted to surprise me. I think he forgot the rest of the family." She forced a laugh. "Maybe she's caught in traffic." The Bird siblings, our hosts, winked and offered champagne. I sipped, but the late afternoon warmth was too much. I perched on a bench beneath a flowering dogwood, watching the lake's ripples play in the light. When you live your life outside family expectations, every late arrival rattles you. 20 minutes before dinner was served, a sleek black SUV rolled past the wrought iron gate. My breath caught. Out stepped Dad. Silver hair, navy suit. Next to him, a woman in a teal sheath dress that contrasted with the spring blossoms. She had jet black hair and two sharp cheekbones, like she'd been sculpted from marble. She smiled and reached for his hand. A photographer clicked, capturing them, two perfect figures stepping into the very story they didn't belong to. Guests froze, forks in mid-air. I saw crossover glances. Aunt Marge's sneer faltered. Uncle Pete's eyebrows rose. Even Eddie and Owen paused. The pranks and whispers quieted against the rustle of bridesmaids adjusting skirts. Everyone's gaze shifted to my father and his new wife, Paula. It was as if the air itself had held its breath. I felt a thunderclap in my chest. The family's teasing of me, my freelancing, my choice of wardrobe, all of it drained away in an instant of recognition. This was the woman who'd turned my home into an adult daycare, who'd treated me like a guest, who'd served me eviction-style rent notices. This was her wedding debut. My shoulders straightened. A volcano of resentment and pride ignited in my chest. I rose from the bench and walked toward them. The guests parted like reeds. My father's face lit up when he saw me. Pride, guilt, something like apology twinkling in his eyes. Paula gave me a polite nod, but her eyes narrowed slightly, as though I were a misaligned piece in her perfect tableau. I stopped a few feet away. The gathering's murmur dropped to silence. A cricket chirped. A breeze stirred the napkins on the tables. All the whispers, the teasing aimed at me, all that noise fell away. It was just us, here in the hush that follows a thunderclap. My father stepped forward. "Marissa," he said, voice low, as if afraid the moment might break. He stopped, throat working. He looked at Paula, then at me, and exhaled. "I'd like you to meet someone very important in my life." He took my hand and squeezed it. "This is Paula." I offered her a smile. Sharp, measured. She let her hand hover. The world waited, breathless. Then I saw my husband, Luke, coming up the path behind me, blazer slung over his shoulder, tie undone, eyes bright with surprise. He touched my shoulder softly. "Marissa," he said. In that instant, the entire crowd blinked back to life. Everyone seized forks and cameras. The birds stood, stunned. Aunt Marge snapped her speech in half. Lips parted, eyes wide. But instead of mocking me, they fell silent again. This time in awe, confusion, a tidal shift of attention. I turned to Luke, heart pounding, and he wrapped his arm around my waist, kissing my forehead. "Happy anniversary, honey," he whispered. My breathing caught. 2 years ago today, we'd married in a small chapel my mother had lit with candles. My family had sat in the back pews, polite applause and forced smiles. Everyone had teased that I was too young to settle down, too naive to find love so quickly, too impulsive to marry someone so different from the right type. Now, exactly 2 years later, I stood at my cousin's wedding, with my husband by my side, and I felt the ground shift under the family's expectations. Paula stared at us, uncertain, her perfect composure cracking. My father swallowed, gaze fixed on the intertwined hands of his daughter and her husband. The guests murmured, "I thought she was single, and he's so handsome, and what a beautiful couple." All whispers of admiration, not ridicule. Luke smiled down at me, pride blazing in his gaze. I realized that on this day, in this moment, he'd canceled every cruel word ever spoken, wiped away every whisper, and restored my place in our family narrative, with him as my champion. Paula's entrance had been the pivot. His arrival was the proof that I wasn't the bridesmaid everyone had written me off, as I was the bride of my own life. My father cleared his throat. "Anita Marcus," he began, voice strong, "thank you for including us in this celebration. I'd like to say a few words." He gestured for Paula, me and Luke to join the front. The hush deepened, cameras focused. I looked at Luke and smiled. The teasing was behind me now. Ahead lay a lifetime of jokes replaced by applause, whispers replaced by cheers. The dogwoods bent over the gazebo, as though leaning in to witness this transformation. My father's toast began, "To family old and new, love that stands the test of time." And for the first time in years, I felt seen, valued, and celebrated. The guests rose their glasses, but the world felt smaller. It was the three of us, arm in arm, redefining our family's story together. The house breathed with the familiar creak of old oak floorboards and the hum of the ancient furnace. I'd returned home for the summer, 23 years old, freshly graduated, and eager to save up for grad school. When I'd first walked through the front door, the scent had struck me like a memory. My mother's cinnamon vanilla candles mingled with the faint musk of our labradoodle, Daisy. This was my sanctuary, the refuge where I'd spent every childhood summer chasing fireflies in the backyard, reading on the front stoop, and holding my mother's hand through scraped knees. It was home. But now, with my new stepmother, Claudia, in residence, and Dad happily smitten, the atmosphere felt as cramped as a cell block. Claudia had moved in 6 months ago, with her 2 high-priced suitcases and a binder of chore charts so meticulously organized it would have made a project manager weep with envy. At first, I'd chalked it up to a nervous bride, to Bee's desire for order. After all, Dad and my mom had died in that tragic accident 2 years back, and she was new to this patchwork family. But the core list had bled into arbitrary demands, cleaning the guest room every other day, dusting the second-floor banister each morning, loading the dishwasher 3 cycles per day, better if run at noon and 6 p.m. I was a full-time employee in a privately funded household where every mistake warranted a sigh and a finger wag. I remember the morning I realized the line had been crossed. I pushed open my bedroom door to the sharp crack of sunlight on hardwood and the scent of rosemary mint body wash. There she stood, Claudia, tall as a runway model in a charcoal pantsuit, hair pulled back so tightly her cheekbones looked like they'd taken a scalpel to the air. In her perfectly manicured hand, she held a rental agreement. "Good morning, Marissa," she said, voice cool as glacier melt. "I left this on your desk. Please sign and return by the end of the week." I blinked at the envelope, thick as legal documents always are. At first, I thought it was a form I'd ordered online, my usual impulse when life felt chaotic, to shore up control with spreadsheets and checklists. Then I read the bold letters across the top: residential rental agreement tenant, Marissa Caldwell landlord, C. Ellington monthly rent, $750, security deposit, $500. Suitably stunned, I dropped my hairbrush onto the carpet. "Rent?" I rasped. "But this is Dad and my house. I live here." Claudia's lips curled into a polite smile. "You live here. Renting is a grown-up privilege. It comes with responsibilities, rent, utilities, and upkeep. Please see Clause 4.2 for detail." She nodded once, crisply, then turned on her heel and swept down the hallway. I stood in my pajamas, staring at that word, tenant, until the fog behind my eyes lifted. In that moment, I understood. I was no longer Dad's baby girl. I was a tenant in my childhood home. The discovery set off a chain reaction. I spent the afternoon leafing through the document like a hostage negotiator, circling clauses, tallying expenses. There was a tenant obligation section, listing weekly chores, mopping shared areas, laundering Claudia's bath towels, polishing the silver, and then a penalty schedule for missed tasks: $25 for an unemptied trash, $15 for an unwatered plant, $50 for any indication of dog hair in the living room. It felt like an assault on my dignity. That evening, I cornered Dad at dinner. We were in the kitchen, our old farmhouse table, groaning under a spread of roasted vegetables and baked chicken. Daisy nosed my sock under the table. "Dad," I said, as calmly as I could muster, "Claudia served me a rental agreement." Dad's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He set it down slowly. "Honey," he began, voice gentle but eyes hard, "Claudia and I discussed it. You're an adult now. You don't live under my roof for free." I spluttered. "I don't live under your roof. You built this house with Mom. I helped pay mortgage before we even got married." He rubbed his temples. "This is how adults handle shared space." I felt a flare of anger. Shared space, that kitchen, that table, is in my blood. I jerked my head toward the living room, where Mom's wedding photo still hung above the mantel. "Are you telling me she has more right to this home than I do?" Dad closed his eyes and exhaled. "That's enough, sweetie." He looked at me, my own father, whose arms once lifted me above his shoulders. But now he was protecting the contract he'd co-signed, the rent notice he'd endorsed. I swallowed hard. "Fine, I'll pay rent." He nodded graciously, as if I'd just volunteered to bake cookies for the PTA. Over the next 2 days, I watched Dad's bank statements plop into Claudia's financial portfolio: rent transfers, utility reimbursements, chore reimbursements. Meanwhile, I drained my savings faster than I could refill it. I skipped happy hours, postponed my last few freelance assignments, canceled my standing coffee subscription because naturally caffeine was listed as a non-essential expense. Dust bunnies gathered in corners, their fluffy legs mockingly untouched. At work, where I was an editorial assistant for a small digital magazine, my inbox began to chime at odd hours. Texts from Claudia, reminding me of upcoming chores, Slack messages at midnight. Please remember to declutter the front hall before breakfast. My coworkers noticed my gray circles and constant yawning, but I laughed it off. What could be the big deal? I had a roof and a contract, until I didn't. One hot Friday, I returned home from work to find the garage door open, the interior light glowing. The steps up to the side entrance were slick with pollen. My heart sank. I clutched my bag and crept in. The first thing I saw was Claudia's vacuum cleaner wedged in the hallway, blocking my path. Then I heard footfalls upstairs, the drone of a podcast, and the squeak of a mattress. I raced up to my bedroom. The door stood ajar. Inside, the mattress was gone. My single bed, hand-me-down from my grandmother, had been wheeled out substitute for a queen mattress, a plush four-poster. My clothes were shuffled aside. A brand new set of designer luggage was lined up neatly on the floor. A handwritten note lay on my pillow. Dear tenant, your room has been upgraded to better serve our guests. Please settle the $500 upgrade fee by Tuesday. Enjoy. I dropped to my knees, staring at the soggy sheet that once smelled of lavender, now replaced by crisp hotel linen starch. The bed was locked to the floor, bolted. I shrieked, and Claudia appeared at the doorway, arms crossed, eyes cool. Upgrade, she crooned. It's all part of the hospitality plan. We need the space for my corporate retreat next week. I trembled. But my things, my bed, where am I supposed to sleep? She sighed, exasperated. On the couch, sweetie. It's perfectly comfortable. My entire world tilted. My room, my refuge, was now a hotel suite for her paying clients, and I, the creator of that space, was relegated to second-class residency. I stormed out of the house before the tirade could swell. Daisy barked behind me as I slammed the door. That night, on my best friend Zoe's couch, I fought tears. I held Claudia's rent notice and the upgrade invoice as though they'd poisoned my blood. Zoe patted my hand. You can't live like this, she said. This is textbook financial abuse and housing discrimination. You have rights. Her roommate Orun pitched in. She can't just evict you from your own room. Dad's on the deed. It's your home too. I wiped my eyes. I'm scared to go back tomorrow. Zoe's jaw set. Then we'll go together. Irun nodded, and I'll draft you a cease and desist letter to her lawyer. That room, it's your primary residence. The law protects that. Hope flickered in my chest. They found me a free legal clinic, lit me up with resources. Tenant rights for owner-occupied dwellings, contractual law on implied tenancy, property statutes. Zoe and Orun stayed up until 2 a.m., drafting documents, a notice of rent overcharges, and demand to restore premises. The letters were notarized the next morning. On Monday, I walked in armed with evidence, and Zoe in tow. Dad was on a conference call in his study. I slipped the rent papers and legal notices onto his keyboard. When he emerged, I met his eyes head-on. Dad, I said, voice steady. I filed complaints with the town housing board and contacted a lawyer. These are the papers. I laid them out carefully. You signed the deed. I live here rent-free. She has no right to upgrade and invoice me for my own room. And the rent agreement she served is invalid. No landlord's signature, no legal basis. Dad stared, shocked. His jaw moved soundlessly. After a long moment, he closed his eyes. I didn't realize how far she'd take it. His voice shook. I'm so sorry, Marcy. I swallowed. I don't want to leave home. I love this place, but I can't live as her tenant. He exhaled, relieved. Then I'll talk to her. Right now. Moments later, Claudia stormed into the foyer, demanding to know what was going on. Dad held the papers in front of her. Claudia's face turned as white as aged linen. My dear, Dad said, his voice firm for the first time in months, I own this house. You are not my landlord. And you've crossed the line. He handed her the demand to restore premises letter. You will remove your upgrades, reinstall my daughter's bed by tomorrow morning, and drop all rent demands. Or I will. Claudia's lips trembled. She looked from me to Dad and back. For a long, tense second, she stood silent. Then she crumpled, shoulders shaking. As she closed her eyes, tears brimming. I'm sorry. I felt the tension drain out of me. The house sighed as though it too drew a breath. Dad touched my arm. I met his eyes and saw relief and pride. I'd reclaimed my home. That night, I slept in my restored childhood bed, the same pine frame I'd painted my first watercolors on, smelling of lavender sachets once more. Daisy curled at my feet. I thought of everything Claudia had tried to take: my dignity, my privacy, my security. She treated me like a tenant, a stranger, a maid. But I had taken back my home, with the help of friends, the law, and my father's awakening. In the morning, I texted Zoe, "You're the best. Brunch is on me," and to Arun, "Law school still worth it," and to Dad, "Thank you for standing up for me." He replied with a heart emoji. I walked outside to the garden, where Mom's lilacs bloomed, their scent drifting on the breeze like an old melody. I knew things would never be perfect. We'd need healing, conversations, perhaps family therapy. But I also knew that home is where love and respect reside, not rent checks and chore charts. I'd taken back my voice, my room, and my right to belong. And that was just the beginning. The lilies by the hedge still waited for planting. Daisy still needed her afternoon walks, and life, free, full, and fiercely mine, unfolded beyond that garden gate.